Hello, my name is G. My actual name is Yermun, but everyone calls me G. I am here to make a short video series on C, the programming language C. Specifically ANSI C, and then maybe some other videos after that. But I found that during my time as a lecturer, I learned that teaching is definitely the best form of learning. You to be able to explain difficult concepts in an easy way, you have to understand that concept at a pretty deep level, and so you have to really dive into a topic. On the other side of that, you also have to take notes and then repeat back what you learned, and which are both really effective learning strategies. So yeah, I'm gonna make videos as I learn the C programming language. Now I have some prior experience with C programming, but I wanted to take it from the bottom up and really make my knowledge robust on the subject. So this is a learning experience for me as well. If I mess up, I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments, and I will either put in a comment in the video, or I will, address it in the next video, or I'll re-record the whole video. We'll see what I do, but I promise to address it. So yeah, if someone can learn from my learning, then it's a win-win situation, and that's all I'll say about the background here. So, just some, what are we going to go over today? One, we're going to look at some just general bullet points about the C programming language. Like, what is it? What's the deal? And then two, we will look at the history of C up until ANSI C, and then a little bit beyond. One, C is a general purpose programming language. What do I mean by that? It means, well, C has been called a system programming language because it has been used to write things like compilers or operating systems. But it works well as just general software development, and you can use it for writing pretty much any program. So that's what I mean by general purpose. C started, so that's point one. Point two, C started as the language for the Unix operating system. It was created by Dennis Ritchie and Ken Thompson. I'll get more into detail about the history in a second. C is machine independent, which means that you can run C on any operating system on any hardware. Doesn't matter. C is not a big language. It's a fairly small language, actually. C comes with a standard library, so it's kind of like additional functionality that lets us do things like reading and writing to files, use inputs and outputs, string manipulation, and a bunch more. And C is a relatively low-level programming language. What do I mean by that? Well, some people have called it a medium or middle level programming language. It's kind of relative. If you're used to writing assembly, then yeah, C is going to be a pretty high level programming language. But if you are used to working in a very high level programming language like Java or C# or whatever, then yeah, C is going to look more low level. So that's why I see relatively low level programming language. It doesn't have things like some modern features like a heap or garbage collection. So these are things that maybe some concepts that I'll get into in a future video, but that's the gist of it. Those are some bullet points, some notes on C. So let's dive into some history. I have a little whiteboard thingy set up here. I have a little notepad thing and a little pen so I can write on the whiteboard like so. So, Let's start by writing down some names, because these are kind of central figures to C as a programming language and the history of C. So first, Ken Thompson. P-S-O-N. Dennis Ritchie. And then I'll also add Brian Kernighan. There we go. So let's do this. Let's add a picture of Ken Thompson, now Dennis Ritchie, and now Brian Kernighan. All right. Here's a little timeline. In 1969, that's where I'll start. A bit of a backstory. Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie, they were both working for Bell Labs at the time. And they were working on the Unix operating system. In 1969, Ken Thompson developed B, which is another programming language. And he was planning on using that programming language to write what's called the kernel of the Unix operating system. B is a stripped down version of the already existing programming language BCPL. It had its downsides. B was an interpreted programming language, which was kind of its downfall because it was too slow. So in roughly 1971, Dennis Ritchie created NuB, or NB, and Thompson then started using that to rewrite the Unix kernel using NB. NB then got renamed to C. So that's where the name comes into play. That's the first kind of mention of the C programming language is in 1971. In 1973, the Unix kernel gets extensively rewritten or re-implemented in C. And then sometime between then and 1978, this guy called Brian Kernighan, reaches out to Dennis Ritchie to kind of write a book on the C programming language. In his own words, Thompson and Ritchie weren't the best at documenting their work. And so he really wanted to create a book that made it easy for programmers to get started with the C programming language and get up and running and work with it. And in 1978, I wrote KNR, which stands for Kernighan and Ritchie, published the first edition of the C programming language, which is a fairly small book. And I have the second edition of that book here. You can see it's a fairly small book. And it was nicknamed KNR-C, which stands for Kernighan and Ritchie C. It also goes by the name C78, which is kind of the name of the standard of C at the time. So I guess I could write up here in the left corner. C versions. Can you see that? Yeah. Are nicknamed like CXX, right? So the standard for C that was released in 1978 is called C78. And then in as C rose in its popularity and its use, it got implemented on very many systems. mainframes, and other computers. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the book specified how the C programming language should look and work, but how that gets compiled into machine code on a specific system, it's up to whoever implements that compiler. And so things that weren't specified in KNRC, it was up to whoever created the system to interpret it the way they wanted. And so the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, they created a committee to establish a better standard for C, a more specific standard. And in 1983, they published that standard as the second edition of the C programming language book, which is the one I have right here. You can see right there, it says ANSI C. Oh, now you saw my green screen. ANSI C. Yeah. So that's the history up until ANSI C, and that's why it's called ANSI C. It stands for the American National Standards Institute version of the C standard. That was also then nicknamed ANSI C, or you can also refer to it as C83. Well, then you go, well, surely this programming language must have been updated since 1983, and you'd be correct. However, C is more or less the same language from ANSI C going out, with few features added afterwards. But a good approach to learning C is just starting with ANSI C and then learning about the later revisions to the standard afterwards. And that will be my approach in these videos as well. Right, but yeah, of course, there have been changes to it. There's something called C95, which was published in 1995. You have C99. You have C11, which adds something called multi-threading. So this one is a pretty big one, actually. I'll write it over here. Multi-threading to the C programming language. That was not a part of it until C11. So yeah, there are important features in later revisions. You have C17. And the most recent one at the date of recording this is C23. Most recent. So yeah, that's it. So what have we talked about today? I've given you some bullet points about the C programming language. What is it generally? And I've given you kind of like a brief history of the C programming language and my approach in these videos. In the next video, I'll talk a little bit about compilers. We'll actually write our first program, and I might also talk a little bit about IDEs. So we'll learn a bit about that. All right.